Welcome to This Organized Life. If you're a mom, wife, or coffee lover seeking advice on how to reduce clutter and reclaim time, look no further than your host, Lori Palau, founder of Simply Be Organized and author of Hot Mess, a practical guide to getting organized. For a lot of people, clutter is their dirty little secret, but it doesn't have to be. Each week, we will share practical tips, chat with experts, and provide strategies on how to keep you organized. I hope that by sharing our stories, you feel a little less alone and more empowered to tackle the areas that are holding you back. So let's get started.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of This Organized Life podcast. I am your host, Lori Palau, and today's guest, you guys are in for a treat. And I'm actually really excited to chat with her because we haven't had a chance to officially sit down and get to know one another. But when I was introduced to her story, I was immediately fascinated. Obviously, for people that have been with me for a while, love organization. I love design. I love DIY stuff. I love farmhouses. I love all of the things. And so I love mixing design with the organizational process. I always think the process of organizing should be fun. It shouldn't be a chore. It's got this I think it's shifting. And obviously we're going to talk about that. But for so long, there was just organization was tied to cleaning and just blah things. And I think when we rewrite the narrative and when we look at organization to give us freedom for the things that we want to do and incorporate it into our lifestyle, it has a whole new meaning and perspective. And so today's guest is Noell Jett. And many of you might know Noell from her crazy social media following. She's got hundreds of thousands of people on Instagram and TikTok and all the things. And it's her handle is Jet Set Farmhouse. And if you're not familiar with her, she basically chronicles her entire family's journey through restoring this old farmhouse and growing her family. And if any of you guys are going to watching this on YouTube, by the time this airs, she's going to have 5 kids. Right now, she has 4 3/4. I'm so excited to be able to kind of get this conversation in before baby number 5 arrives. But we're here to also not just talk about her story, but also her book, which I haven't had the chance to read, but I told her publicist, I can't wait to get my hands on it because it talks about the practical side of how they did this, DIY project and what that entailed, but it also talks about her life. And I think, again, when we look back at anybody's story of how they got to where they are, there's all these other layers that play into the organizing process, the decluttering process, how we approach things. And so we want to talk about all of that with Noell today. So without further ado, let me welcome my guest, Noell Jett, to the show. Hi,
Noel.
how are you?
I am great. How are you?
I am great. So I just gave our listeners a really kind of very broad stroke top line overview. Hopefully I hit the mark. And if I missed, and if I didn't, feel free to correct me and whatnot, because I know that we're newer friends. So I'm going to be learning as much as our guests are today, or as our listeners are today. So tell everyone a little bit about you and who you are.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. It is my pleasure to be on here and squeezing this in before, baby number 5 makes its appearance in the world, and I have no time for several weeks.
Oh my gosh. And I saw Noell looks like a supermodel, by the way. Just FYI. I am here in my usual, looking like a homeless person, and she looks like $1 million.
If they're watching, they can see the props all behind me, just trying to keep me comfortable here. Well, my husband Daniel and I live in St. Augustine, Florida, which is the worst place I think you could possibly be to be 8 months pregnant in August. So I'm staying inside or in the water for the most part. So my husband and I, when we met, he shared with me that since high school, he had a dream of building his house with his own hands. Now, mind you, he had construction experience, like tile, paint, the finish type experience. building a house is a totally different ball game, like foundation, framing, all the components to it that are so much more than just, oh, well, he can lay some tile. Yes, totally different. But I loved it. I thought that is one of the coolest things I've ever heard in my life. My dad was big on DIY. So that became a goal for us together as a couple as we got married and began to grow our family. And it took us several years to bring this to fruition. I think it was close to 10 years by the time we actually were into the house. So it was it wasn't just something like, oh, that's a good idea, let's just do that, tomorrow. We had to grow our business to a point that it could sustain a build financially and from a time perspective as we were doing the work ourselves. So, you have to be making money and be able to build. So it took us a long time to make that happen, to find the land, just to make all the pieces come together. And about a month before we actually began this process and closed on our loan, I stumbled across Instagram and discovered this home building world that was out there where people were sharing their homes and their lives and their journeys and building these spaces they loved. And at that point, I had no idea. I had been kind of just wrapped up with my 4 kids and homeschooling and doing all the things, like
I was going to ask, you had all 4 kids at the time. Like I was just trying to get a perspective at that point.
So by the time we broke ground, we had all 4 kids. So Crew would have been, which Crew is our youngest at this point, he would have been 2 when we started to build.
And what was the oldest? So what was your age range?
Oh, you're going to make me do math.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. So right now they're 17, 14, 9, and 6. So this would have been 4 years ago. So Isaac would have been 13.
Yeah.
So 13, 10, 5, and 2.
Okay. That's crazy.
Crew was like that child that makes you want to lose your mind. You just don't go out in public because he was so intense, So my life was just consumed in my home. And for the first time, I kind of pulled myself away from my husband's business so I could focus on the kids. And so for the first time since I was 15 years old, I didn't have a job. I didn't have anything outside of my children. And I felt a little lost. Like, what else can I do to distract myself from the monotony of motherhood and just make me feel like I have a little bit of a purpose outside of just these children that just, they can be very draining. And so when I saw the social media opportunity, I thought, that's something that is low cost. I can just jump into it. I can devote as much or as little time as I want. And I think it would give me a great sense of community and just something that would be my own. So that was truly the purpose for why I began it, just sharing and growing a community. Little did we know that was absolutely going to change our lives. So that was all like February, March of 2018. Fast forward to July, I had grown my platform to 20,000 followers on Instagram, and a door company reached out and they said, hey, would you be willing to let us put doors on this house that you're building in exchange for some social media presence? And, at first we're like, is this a scam? Like, really? Who's willing to do this? But when we were pinching pennies as tight as we're, trying to do as many DIYs, repurposing materials, salvaging things, anything we could to make, this house happen on a very tight budget. If you could save my door budget and I could put that somewhere else, like, sign me up. But it also got my wheels turning. Like, if they're willing to do that, who else might be willing to do that? So for the next 2 years, that became my purpose. Grow a platform to provide value to my audience, connect with brands, see who I could partner with. We ended up partnering on almost $500,000 worth of products, trips, all these different things, and ended up building a house that instead of, getting it to the finish line and then maybe taking the next 5 years to finish it, finished as a truly magazine book worthy home.
It's gorgeous.
With something we never imagined.
I was looking. So yeah, everybody, and obviously we'll have links to everything in our show notes. But I was in research for this conversation, was looking through and going, this is incredible. Like this literally is like that, what you would picture, this quintessential Pinterest perfect
Yes.
Instagram, photos.
Which is what we wanted, but we just, the budget, like we just thought, well, if it takes us 5 years to make that happen, then so be it. As long as we have a bathroom and some running water, we'll be good.
And I do want to say for people out there, like you make it sound like it was easier than I'm sure it was. Okay. Because as somebody who's a small business owner and has a platform, it's again, reaching out to people, connecting with people. And yes, you had gained this organic community and audience, which is awesome. But this was a lot of work, I'm sure. So
absolutely.
And follow up. It wasn't. So for people out there, yes, it can be done. I think this is great inspiration for people, but I also don't want to take away credit from you that this was a full-time job.
Oh, absolutely. And add on to that, homeschooling the 4 kids, building the house by ourselves, which we had never done before. So like literally we're framing the walls ourselves. Like, and I mean, not to take away from what my husband did, because he did so much, but one thing that I did on my own was frame the entire interior upstairs walls. Cause it was something I could do on my own while they were doing other things. Cause you're just building walls and you're kind of stacking them up in the corner. And then when they're ready for them, they can kind of pull them and, nail them into place. So I had never framed a wall in my life. And yeah, I'm framing the entire interior on top of doing all of this on social media. So yes, it took so much energy and time and effort. And I mean, looking back, those 18 months were just a blur of putting one foot in front of the other, waking up every day, like not even having the strength to stress. Like you just do what you got to do. We get, pressure from the bank over here. Like you have to get this done, and pressure from brands. Like, we need to get our content in. So it was definitely a lot of stress.
Yeah, I can imagine. And did you at any point in this journey, and this is my entrepreneurial hat on, like, did you at any point bring on any type of help in terms of assistance and people to help you push the content out, connect up with the brands, do all the back and behind the scenes stuff that needs to get done? Because again, now this isn't just a fun little Instagram page, like you're running a business.
Right. No, I did not. I'm learning to bring people in and learning to get help and learning those things. But at the time I didn't know. I didn't know to do that. And I wouldn't have known how to even find someone like that or what I needed help with. I was just figuring it out as I went. Definitely though, when it gets to a certain point, if I'm giving advice to someone that's trying to grow in a similar pathway, having an agent, having an assistant, having those things makes all the difference in the world. And I wish, looking back, I think everything happened how it was supposed to happen, but looking back, it would have been very nice to have that kind of help.
Sure. No, it's absolutely a lot. I also, I can't help but think, oh my goodness, you and your husband and your kids are together 24/7, working together, living together, homeschooling together. Was the pandemic happening at this point? Like,
we moved in November of 2019.
Okay,
so the pandemic took place.
So you didn't have that handle to worry about, thankfully, but still, there was a lot, and I can't imagine what that was like. Maybe you could just talk a little bit about that whole experience.
So the term I use for that is oversaturation. Yeah. You're just with each other constantly. You don't get a break. You don't get, time to step away and like just have your space to yourself. And to add insult to injury, we had been renting a house for almost 7 years at this point. And we had kind of had an understanding with the landlord, like, hey, when we're about 60 days out from this build being finished, we'll let you know, and, we'll move out. They came to us in the spring of 2019 and said, hey, we're going to sell the house and we want to put it on the market by May 31st. You guys need to be out. Mind you, we didn't move into the house until November of 2019. So we're homeless. Like, what do we do? And we didn't know, like, hey, it's still going to be another 5 months. Like, it was like, we were just working so hard, just trying to get in, hoping like maybe we could get done in 2 months, 3 months. Like, we're not sure. So you don't want to go sign a lease. You don't want to go move everything somewhere else when you don't know what's happening. So we ended up getting a camper from some friends of ours that needed a place to store it, pulled it on the property, hooked it up to the electric and the sewer. Not water though, just electric and sewer. And so we had no way to cook, we had no way to shower. And every night, and imagine we're living in a construction zone. So the kids are covered
with four kids. This is not like you and your husband are just roughing it as newlyweds.
No, this is 4 kids. So we'd have to load the kids up every night, drive them to his mom's house, bathe them, pick up food from like the gas station around the corner. There's a little barbecue joint there. And we did that from July until we moved in.
Holy moly. Now, what was it? Now, looking back, the kids are probably like, that was a crazy adventure. But when you were in it, what was that? Was there?
The kids, kids are so resilient and they just, everything's an adventure to them. So I don't know, especially the younger two, like to them, it was just fun. And we really worked hard. And we talk about this more in our book that comes out in November, about including your kids and finding ways to keep them involved in your project so that they feel like they're, truly playing a role in this versus just, you be quiet and sit in the corner and let mommy and daddy work. We tried really hard to find ways to keep them included and involved. Our older girls, it was probably a little bit harder because it went from, having just mom and dad at their disposal basically 24/7, go spending time together, going on trips, doing whatever, because we were self-employed and homeschooled. So we were together and having fun most of the time. And then suddenly mom and dad are just not available. I can't take you to your friend's house. I can't take you here. No youth group tonight. We're busy. So I think it was a little bit harder on them. But just reminding them of the bigger picture and remembering that for us, we saw the goal line. We could see what we were working toward, and we knew this was a short-term thing. For kids, they think life has changed. Like, this is going to be this way forever. Like my parents are crazy now. And, they don't understand that it's just a short-term thing. So taking the time to remind them of that and showing them and talking to them about setting those goals and doing the hard work and getting in there and making the sacrifices for a long-term benefit. And once that all happened and the house was finished, we would make sure and revisit that and remind them, remember all that time we spent and all those things we did. This is why.
Yeah, absolutely. I love it. And I think, again, it all comes back to the why and being able to, be able to do these things and for the greater good. And all I keep, again, coming back to the physical stuff, right? You have 4 kids and you're homeschooling. Even if you're renting a house, like there's stuff. You have 4, there's 6 humans living in this space. There's multiple things. There's shoes, clothes, all the things. From a space perspective, I cannot speak today. How did you approach like the clutter to help keep clutter out of the equation, or as minimal? I know it's kind of hard to keep it out of the equation altogether, but how did you keep that at bay? So that wasn't just an added roadblock with everything else going on.
So back up 13 years ago now, when I met my husband. So I had gone through a divorce and I had 2 little ones when I met my husband. And going through that divorce process, I think was what really was a catalyst for me in learning the minimalist lifestyle. So, we had bought the new fancy house and we had bought the new fancy furniture. And then when we went through the divorce, I realized none of this has value. And I just, I lost so many things and and then when I met my husband, which is kind of funny, we actually just made the decision to move into a camper on his parents' property for 2 years to put our family in a better financial position so that we could push forward. So going through all of that, the divorce, meeting Daniel, moving into the camper, really just taught me what is important, how to have my priorities, and how to function with as minimal things as possible. It had been an ongoing journey. It wasn't something that I just, okay, we got this. It was something that I had to learn and process and grow. But once we got to that point, it was just like, okay, here's, you know, you have enough outfits for this week. We didn't have a washer and dryer, so I'm having to drag all of our laundry to a friend's house, you know, once a week or so to do laundry. So just learning to really value the things that we needed to have, but not just have things to have things.
Yeah, I love that. And I'm glad that you shared the whole journey, or like the bigger picture, because it is a practice. It is something that it's like a muscle that we continually to work and develop and, you know, to use over time, so that when you are in this point, it isn't just like, oh my gosh, we're completely just changing stuff and trying to retrofit. It's like, this has become part of your lifestyle over this journey of however many years.
And that was a very important lesson for me to learn, because I think in the beginning of my adulthood journey, I felt shortchanged. Like I wasn't raised in a home where organization was priority, cleanliness was a priority. And I felt like I just didn't have that ability because I hadn't been raised that way. And it wasn't just like something innate in me. And learning that it's not something that you just do one time and then it's done, or something that you're just taught or not taught. It is something that you learn and process and grow, and give yourself grace and give your children grace, and understand that it's a learning process. And there's going to be seasons in your life where, you know, it's just not as organized as you would like. And then there's going to be seasons where you're on your game and you've got it all together, and just giving that flexibility and grace to yourself and your children was just so important for me to learn. And just learning, yes, that, like you said, it is a learning process, not just something you wake up and do one day.
Absolutely. We're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, I want to dive into your book, because I think there's a lot. So, and you just started to touch on it. And I was like, I definitely want to go into kind of that whole process, because that's a whole other layer of adding chaos into your life. So everyone sit tight. We'll be right back. All right, Noelle. So you have all of, you know, you're doing great in terms of your business is taking off. The things are coming through. Everything's, I mean, it's happening. It's, you know, and then you decide at some point, why not write a book? Because that's easy. And that's not, you know, another whole other job. To talk us through the book. What made you decide to write it? And what it's all about. So just give us that whole story.
Let's preface this with ignorance is bliss. If I had known how much work a book was going to be, just like if I had known how much work a house was going to be, truly, you know, maybe I wouldn't have done those things, but then again, I wouldn't have done them and we wouldn't be where we are. So it all happens for a reason. So we had dinner with a dear friend of ours, at an HGTV event. And she said, you know, I really just think the next step for you guys is to write a book. And we're like, I mean, that's cool and all of it. You don't just write a book. Like, how do you just make that happen? This was on a Tuesday night. On Sunday, I get a DM from a follower, and she's like, hey, I just, you know, I don't remember exactly what she said, but just was thanking me for my platform and for some nugget of wisdom that she had gleaned from our platform. And she was just thanking me for it. And she shared with me that she was a fiction writer for Thomas Nelson. And we just kind of got to talking. And within 24 hours of our conversation, I had an email in my email box from the senior acquisitions editor at Thomas Nelson saying, hey, have you guys ever considered telling your story in a book? And this goes back to, I'm a very firm believer in things happening the way they're supposed to happen. Hard work, absolutely a piece of the puzzle. Putting yourself in the right position, absolutely a piece of the puzzle. All these things go into it, but knowing that there is a bigger plan in place and things are happening that we don't even always know what's going on, but just opening our minds and allowing those things to come in when they're supposed to. Firm believer in that. So we said, absolutely, let's do it.
For sure.
That's like a once in a lifetime opportunity. Absolutely. So we hired an agent and got the contract, and we ended up doing a 2-book deal. So the one book came out in March called From the Ground Up. And as you said in the intro, that kind of tells the story of building the house and kind of uses it as a metaphor for my life and things I've overcome, things I've learned, and just uses the house story to kind of parallel that. And then the next book comes out in November, and that is more of the practical, step-by-step DIY things to help people as they either want to build their own home, renovate, or even just create spaces that they love.
Oh, that's so exciting. I love that. And what was that process like? Because obviously, like doing it, and I know from my own experience as somebody who has spent a decade organizing for other people and getting in there and organizing for myself and my own family, and then organizing for other people, and just getting in there and doing it, either figuring it out, right, myself, just organically, trial and error, or having whatever the strategy is. But then to be able, I remember when I was writing my book, then to be able to articulate it in a way to people that it's going to click when you're documenting that, what you're so used to just rolling up your sleeves and doing.
Yes.
And explaining it in a way that can paint that visual picture to somebody is not an easy task.
No,
it really
it
isn't.
Not. No. And I remember the first call that I had with that agent, and she said, I think the biggest thing we're going to want to know is like, what's in your mind? Like, what's your thought process? And I'm like, I don't know how to tell you that. Like, it's just like my life, the course of events that I've been on in this world have shaped me. And like, this is just how I think and how I am. So yes, having to figure out like, how do I put that on paper and how do I explain to other people what just kind of comes innately to me is not an easy process.
Yeah, absolutely. So how did you, what was the driving force to be able to make that connection happen? How did you find the way? Because you could do the storytelling. Obviously, you had been doing the storytelling through social media for the past couple of years.
Yes. So I think just knowing that every person has a story. We have a voice. We have reasons that we are here and reasons for the things we have gone through. And just being handed an opportunity to tell that story to the world, one, made it feel like a lot of the things that I had been through had a purpose. There was a reason that they happened. It wasn't just like this convoluted series of events that just had no reason, but I can now use my story to encourage and help others. So that really motivated me to dig deep, find the source of everything that I am and that I'm trying to accomplish, and really try to break that down and share it with others. And just remembering that there's women out there and girls out there that are still where I was 10, 20, 30 years ago. And if I can encourage them and motivate them and inspire them that there's something to work toward and you can accomplish those big dreams, and there's just so much more out there, and not to limit yourself, remembering those people just drove me to dig deep and make it happen.
I love that. And I know you touch on it. And again, we'll talk in whatever way that you are comfortable, and you could share as much as you're comfortable with. But I know you alluded to the fact that like you didn't grow up in this Instagram not that anybody really does, but you overcame a lot. And probably at some point in your younger self, you probably maybe had trouble envisioning that this could be a reality for you. And I know I talked to a lot of people, and one of the things that kind of breaks my heart the most, and one of the reasons that I continue to come on here and do this, is because I want to give people inspiration and hope and empower them that just because you came from a certain situation, whether you grew up in a hoarding household or you grew up as a parent, child of divorce, or whatever it was, whatever your struggle was, or you struggle with ADHD growing up. And so whatever that is, that doesn't define who you are. And yes, you may have to work a little bit harder in certain areas to either unlearn unhealthy behavior or work a little harder to do something that comes naturally to somebody else. But what I do and partially what you do are learned skills, and they are things that are attainable.
Yes.
So maybe you could just share a little bit of your story just to give people like the backstory of young Noell.
Absolutely. And what you said is just so perfect and so true. And like I said, one of my major motivating factors. And so growing up in the foothills of the Ozark Mountains in Southwest Missouri, we were just surrounded by poverty. Like we honestly didn't realize how poor we were because everyone was poor. You didn't know anyone that had success at all. And anyone that did have anything remotely nice, oh, they're just in credit card debt up to their eyeballs, or they're living over their means. There was no such thing as wealth or money management. Like even budgets were scoffed at. Like you can't be on a budget when you don't make any money.
Right.
So we were very sheltered. We grew up in what I label as a religious cult, at best, maybe just very religious extremism. And my dad was the associate pastor there. We went to the school 5 days a week. So we were there, 6 days a week in this church, just getting indoctrinated in their way of thinking. And that was really all we knew. Our time with anyone outside of that circle was extremely limited. Even grandparents, cousins, very, very limited. So the only glimpse I really had at all of anything outside of that world was the stack of like Country Living and Better Homes and Gardens magazines that my grandmother kept on her front porch.
Did you read House Beautiful too? Because that was one.
Yes. Oh yes.
That was
I
one of
love
my
House
favorites.
Beautiful.
Also, House Beautiful, Country Living.
Yes.
Those are my go-tos in my 20s. So
yes, and I would just sit on her porch as a little girl and flip through these magazines and just be mesmerized by this beauty and this organization and this life that I didn't know anyone could live. It just felt very fictional to me, like a fictional thing. Like it's a book, a magazine, it's all just fiction. So I didn't even really quite realize what was out there. Because it was just such a controlled environment. So as I grew up and kind of got away from that, and realized what kind of poverty that I had grown up in, and the chaos and the stress that adds to your life, and just that fundamental feeling of insecurity. If you just, you don't always know where the next thing is coming from, the next food, my clothes, and you're just stressed about money. And as a child, and my dad was in a very freak lawnmower accident when I was 12 years old, which paralyzed him from the neck down. And he had no insurance. He was unable to work. He was in the hospital for, months on end in the physical therapy, told he would never walk again. And they had 5 kids under the age of 14. So I think my youngest brother would have been about 7 at the time. And it was a very traumatic event for our entire family. Like just the whole family was very torn up over this. And it was a monumental moment, for all of us. And it just added so much stress to your shoulders as a child, stress that, thank God, knock on wood, my children will never know. Sure. And, I took on a role of basically supporting myself. My parents wanted to help and they were there, but they didn't have the money to contribute. So from basically 15, 16 on, I was working 2 to 3 jobs at a time or more, going to college, trying my best to just create some semblance of a life for myself. And never in a million years dreaming that, 20 years later, I would be here. Never. I mean, it still blows my mind looking back if you really, really dig into it. But I knew that I wanted more. I knew that I wanted different. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know. I couldn't sit there and write down for you, like, I want this, 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 and this. But I just knew the feeling that I wanted. I wanted peace. I wanted calm. I wanted to enjoy life. I didn't want to be stressed all the time and just be constantly worried about where the next anything was coming from. And so I didn't know how to make it happen. It just felt like so far away and so far removed. And I didn't have anyone showing me a clear picture of what that would look like. And it wasn't until I met Daniel, honestly, and saw his mindset and the way he had been raised. And one of my favorite books is Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And I think that just gives a great metaphor for life and our lives. And finally just seeing that there could be a light at the end of the tunnel, and knowing more clearly what goals could look like and how to bring those things to life, and then just putting in the hard work.
I love it. Thank you so much for walking us through that. I mean, it not only does it help us kind of, again, three-dimensionalize you for everybody out there, but there's somebody out there listening that's like, yes, whether that is I'm young and I'm stuck in underneath my parents' roof, or I'm in an unhealthy, toxic relationship and I don't know where to turn. And I've seen so many people, as I'm sure you do, where they just kind of feel like I'm just going to wave the white flag and this is it. And these changes, again, it wasn't like a light switch. These were small incremental environmental changes, behavioral changes,
Yes.
lifestyle changes, discipline, practice, all of these things that you either had to, again, learn or unlearn, like unlearn the healthy or unlearn the unhealthy, and learn the healthy things about, life and relationship with stuff. And again, I worked with people that I do a lot of talking about generational differences. And one of the common themes is like people that came from the Depression era who experience that extreme poverty have real emotional strongholds to things. And it's shaped out of trauma. And it's shaped from that scarcity mindset of, I might not have this, so I need to hold on to it, which is a very different approach than just keeping up with the Joneses. So they're both, even though it's still a level of emotional clutter, its roots are rooted differently. And so I think the approaches, so all of this to say, I think it's important to go back. I always talk about clutter is just a symptom. We have to go back to the root of why we're doing this. Why do we want the fancy house? Is it a status or is it something else? Why do we want fill in the blank for that?
Right. Yes. So, where you're coming from and the background and the reason for doing it may look different, but the root, it's still the same thing.
Before we take our last break, obviously you've given tons of words of encouragement and wisdom. Tell our listeners, where's the best place that they can find you, connect up with your resources, the book that's already out, the book that's coming out, all the things.
We are just Jet Set Farmhouse on all platforms, which is just our last name, Jet. And we always, even before social media came along, we always called ourselves the Jet Set instead of the Jet family. We're the Jet Set. So, and we built a farmhouse. So we're just Jet Set Farmhouse everywhere.
I love it. And I didn't ask you this real quick. So are you primarily the face, or because the things that I looked at, I saw you, or is Daniel make an appearance? Is he active in it?
He does all the hard work, all the behind the scenes stuff that no one sees and appreciates. But I'm the one that I manage the platforms. I film, I edit, I do the stuff that everyone sees.
I think that's the heavy lifting. I think that's the hard work.
And we've tried to find ways to do it differently and just haven't found anything that quite works for us yet, but we're learning. We're figuring it out one day at a time.
That's awesome. We'll make sure that we have all of that in our show notes. We're going to take one more quick break. We're going to put you in the hot seat, and then we're going to let this very pregnant lady get up and walk around. So sit tight. All right, Noelle, this has been super fun, and I've really enjoyed having you on. And I know that our listeners have enjoyed this conversation too. So I always ask our guests a few wrap-up questions. One of them I think you may have already just answered inadvertently in our last in the last segment. Yes. But obviously we like to know where your inspiration comes from, since you inspire so many people. So we always ask, what is a book that you go to, either that you refer to other people? And I know you reference Rich Man, Poor Man. And if that's your book, we'll stick with it.
It was probably one of the first books I read in my late 20s that really opened my mind to things like you're talking about, the scarcity mindset and the feeling of abundance, those things. I never even heard those terms ever.
Sure.
So that really just kind of opened my mind and began this journey. So I think that will always be one of my biggest aha moments.
Love it. Love it. Okay. And then our last two questions, which you can answer lighthearted, serious, however you want. In this particular season of your life with 4 kids, one on the way, the books, the house, all the things, where do you feel the most organized in your life? And where do you feel like a bit of a hot mess?
Oh, goodness. This is a good question. This is a very good question. So I think I feel the most organized almost in just like a pinnacle of the past, I've been dating almost 13 years now. So, but I've been an adult for almost 20 years now. So, the past 2 decades is I truly feel like I have systems and things in place that allow me to function at a high level for me. And you spoke earlier about, having the ADHD and having the history where you didn't learn these things as a child. And that is totally me. And what used to be my style of cleaning was deep cleaning. Like I love deep cleaning, but surface cleaning was just hard for me. And I couldn't focus day to day to keep it clean. Like once a month I'd go in there and look spotless, but then the rest of the month it was just like, eh. So I truly feel like I've been able to incorporate things that allow my mind and the way I think and function to stay on top of things. And it took a good long time to get those things in place, but I do feel like I'm in a confident place and I don't feel overwhelmed when it gets
huge.
Out of control. Like I know like, hey, you know what? It's a hot mess right now. I'm giving myself grace. Tomorrow it'll be fine. And I don't feel that like this is sending me into a hole and I'm going to be, just overwhelmed for a month because things are just such a mess right now. And that was a big thing for me. I'm assuming that's a big thing for everybody.
I was going to say, no, I think that's a big thing. And I'm really grateful that you shared that and that you pointed that out, because again, I do a lot of talk about like the shame and embarrassment and people tie their space to their identity, and if things are out of whack and then they feel out of whack, and it just becomes this like rabbit hole that people go down. And, I talk a lot about situational clutter versus chronic clutter. And to me, situational clutter is going to happen.
Oh, yeah.
You're going through a renovation. It's Christmas. You've got gifts coming in. You have a graduation, a wedding. It could be a good situation or a stressful situation. But sometimes stuff happens, piles accumulate, the laundry doesn't get put away or done, with the dishes, there are dishes in the sink. We don't like that, but sometimes it's a temporary situation. Where the pain point is when it's chronic, when this is, you don't have the systems. And so this is a byproduct. And when you, not just you, but you collectively out there, when we can just have that little bit of grace and not allow a temporary situational clutter from sending us into a spiral of overwhelm. That's really the goal.
Absolutely.
So on that note, okay, where is the hot mess moment?
I was trying to think over that one. That's a good one. Honestly, I think the hardest part for me, and people are probably not going to believe this because we are on social media, and you look at our platforms and you probably think I'm like a very social, outgoing, talkative person. I'm actually a really big introvert, and my husband and I are total opposites. He like draws energy and gets like this life from being around people. I have to prepare myself, and it's very draining to me. So I can do it in small doses, but then I have to retreat and recoup. So I'm not always very good about being social and making sure that, I have time with my friends, and I get just so wrapped up in my family and my kids and my home and, my work and the things I'm doing here. And I'm not always the best friend or the best, social person. So that is one area that I have really been working on and trying to balance that in my life. Because what I remind myself is I may not need it, but other people may need me. And I just keep telling myself that, and just trying to get to a point where I can balance that.
That's a really valid point. And again, I don't feel like anyone should ever have to apologize for it. It's just a good context to know. And I'm your husband. I get energy from other people, and my husband's you. And he, on the surface, when people meet him, they think he's super social and he's outgoing and he does public speaking and all the things, but he very much needs to recharge. And so I I can relate to that. And that is, yeah.
And so you just have to learn yourself and learn your triggers and learn your boundaries. And I think we thought at one point we realized we lived exactly 17 minutes from 2 grocery stores, Publix. They're both Publix.
Yep.
And my husband said, "Oh, I intentionally go to this one because I want to see people. Like, we know a lot more people in that area, and you always saw someone you know." And I'm like, "Oh, I intentionally go to that one because I don't want to have to run into anyone. I want to just get in, get my groceries, and leave." And I thought that was just such a profound like example of how different we are.
Wait, well, can I tell you a really quick funny story before I let you go? So we have a similar situation. So we live in this like tiny little river town. And so there's not a ton of options. Like we don't have Trader Joe's and a Wegmans. Everything's far. Anyway, so I used to do all the grocery shopping. It was just kind of the way our defaults happened with our division of labor. And I was the primary one. And it would become this running joke in our family that like it would tack on an extra hour for me to be at the grocery store because I would be running into people and stopping and having conversations because I'm just really involved in our community and I enjoyed it. Like, sometimes listen, yes, occasionally there's that person where I'm like, oh, I'm not going down that aisle. But for the most part, I didn't mind it. And it was just kind of like this thing. And at some point we switched roles and I was just kind of getting burned out. And Josh was like, I'll do the grocery shopping. Well, same grocery store, puts in his AirPods, would wear headphones. Now he's definitely not as social and doesn't know as many people, but immediately puts up this like wall, like I can't talk to you because I'm listening to something. So he gets in and out of the grocery store in like no time flat because he intentionally puts this blocker up of like, I'm not going to talk to you. And then if there's that rare person that he does run into that he wants to talk to, he'll make it a point. But like he puts that up as his like, do not disturb sign. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that's so, like, that would never cross my mind, but that's his way of
I love it.
Blocking people out. So
we've discovered that the grocery store is the indicator. The
It
grocery
is.
store is our introvert extrovert meter. Where do you fall in the grocery store meter?
Exactly. Well, Noelle, thank you so much. Again, this has been super fun having you on. We will have links to all things Noelle and Jet Set Farmhouse in our show notes. If this is your first time tuning into our show, welcome. We love having you here. Feel free to drop us a line, a DM, a review, whatever you want. Follow us anywhere on social media, This Organized Life Podcast. And until next week, I'm Lori, another episode of This Organized Life.